or post, right? There it goes. So how come?
Binge drink, they lose it when the DJ drops the knee. She's a good teaser, and we blowing reefer. Your body like a work of art, baby. Don't fuck with me, I'll break your heart, baby. TNG on me, I got a lot of flavor. 1,500 on my feet, I'm trying to kill these haters. I had haters when I was broke, I'm rich, I still got haters. I had hopes when I was broke, I'm rich, I'm still a player. I wear leather Gucci jackets like it's still the 80s. I've been blowing OG kush, I feel a little sedated. I can't worry about a broke, or a hater. Black Beetle, me and Palmer gun related. That girl is a real crowd, please. Small world, all the friends know of me. Young bull living like an old geese. Quick release the cash, watch it fall slowly. Frat girl still trying to get even. Haters mad for whatever reason. Smoke in the air, binge drinking. They lose it when the DJ drops the knee. Mike Wilmer.
Do that one dance, baby. That one dance. Yeah. Oh, you don't know how to do that? Baby, do it for your grandma. Come on, I'm old and I'm trying to learn it. Well, yeah, do it.
Oh my god, oh my god. Girl, ain't that Zayn Zayn? Yes. Don't you love my girlfriend? Girl, I don't care. I don't care, girl. He's still cute. Yes.
Walked in this party and these girls looking at me. Skinny jeans on and you know my head nappy. Hey, okay. I want y'all to do this dance now. Juju on that beat, juju on that beat, juju on that, juju on that, juju on that beat. Now slide, chop, hit them for no stop, ayy. Don't stop, ayy. Don't stop, ayy. Run a man on that beat, ayy. Run a man on that beat, ayy. Run a man on that beat, ayy. Run a man on that beat. Now do your dance, do your dance, do your dance, ayy. You ugly, you your daddy's son, ayy. Ayy, do your dance, ayy. Go crazy, ayy. Get free, ayy. Let's go. Let go. Hey. Okay, yeah. We knuckin' and buckin' and ready to fight. I got my cousin, he with me and got Lizzie on the right. And I'm a Detroit baby and I don't know nothing else besides drinking and having parties and having some fun. I say, look in the mirror, what you expect me to do? I see a 300S and got the blacked out rim. I mean, I like your style, I'm on a whole nother level. If you compare me and you, there wouldn't be no comparison. Juju on that beat, juju on that beat, juju on that, juju on that, juju on that beat. Now slide, chop, hit them for no stop, ayy. Don't stop, ayy. Don't stop, ayy. Run a man on that beat, ayy. Run a man on that beat, ayy. Run a man on that beat, ayy. Run a man on that beat. Now do your dance, do your dance, do your dance, ayy. You ugly, you your daddy's son. Juju on that beat, juju on that beat, juju on that, juju on that, juju on that beat. Now slide, chop, hit them for no stop, ayy. Don't stop, ayy. Don't stop, ayy. Run a man on that beat, ayy. Run a man on that beat, ayy. Run a man on that beat, ayy. Run a man on that beat. Now do your dance, do your dance, do your dance, ayy. You ugly, you your daddy.
I just wanna take you higher. Throw your hands up in the sky. Let's set this party on fire. Players, put your pinky rings up to the moon. Girls, what y'all trying to do? 24 karat magic in the air. Head to toe so clear. Look out. Pop, it's showtime. color red, the blues.
Woo, shit! I'm a dangerous man with some money in my pocket.
Keep up,
So many pretty girls around me and they're waking up the rocket.
keep up,
Why you mad? Fix your face. Ain't my fault they all be jacking.
keep up.
Players only.
Come on, put your pinky rings up to the moon.
Girls,
What y'all trying to do?
24 karat magic in the air. Head to toe, so clear. Look out. Second verse for the hustlers.
Hustlers.
Gangsters.
Gangsters.
Bad bitches and your ugly ass friends. I cannot preach. I cannot preach. I gotta show them how a pimp get it in. First, take your sip.
Sip.
Do your dip. Spend your money like money ain't shit. Ooh, ooh.
We too fresh.
Got to blame it on Jesus.
Hashtag blessed.
They ain't ready for me. I'm a dangerous man with some money in my pocket.
Keep up.
Rocket, 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 les Elohim. Rocket, rocket, rocket.
A few years ago, I got one of those spam emails. And it managed to get through my spam filter. I'm not quite sure how, but it's turned up in my inbox, and it was from a guy called Solomon Odonka. I know. It went like this. It said, hello, James Veach. I have an interesting business proposal I want to share with you, Solomon. Now, my hand was kind of hovering on the delete button, right? As you are, I was looking at my phone. I thought, I could just delete this. Or I could do what I think we've all always wanted to do. And I said, Solomon, your email intrigues me. And the game was afoot. He said, Dear James Veach, we shall be shipping gold to you. You will earn 10% of any gold you distribute. So I knew I was dealing with a professional. I said, how much is it worth? He said, we will start with a smaller quantity. I was like, ah, and then he said, of 25 kilograms. The worth should be about 2.5 million. I said, Solomon, if we're going to do it, let's go big. I can handle it. How much gold do you have? He said, it's not a matter of how much gold. How much is you're capable of handling? What? We can start with 50 kilograms as a trial shipment. I said, 50 kilograms? There's no point doing this at all unless you're shipping at least a metric ton. So what do you do for a living? I said, I'm a hedge fund executive bank manager. This isn't the first time I've shipped bullion, my friend. No, no, no. Then I started to panic. I was like, now look, where are you based? I don't know about you, but I think we're going via the postal service. It ought to be signed for. Right, that's a lot of gold. He said, oh, it'll not be easy to convince my company to do a larger quantity shipment. And I said, Solomon, I'm completely with you on this one. I'm putting together a visual for you to take into the board meeting. Hold tight. This is what I sent Solomon. I don't know if we have any statisticians in the house, but there's definitely something going on. I said, Solomon, attach this email, you'll find a helpful chart. I've had one of my assistants run the numbers. We need to be shipping as much gold as possible. There's always a moment where they try to tug at your heartstrings, and this was it for Solomon. He said, I will be so much happy if the deal goes well, because I'm going to get a very good commission as well. And I said, that's amazing. What are you going to spend your cut on? And he said, on real estate, what about you? I thought about it for a long time. And I said one word. Hummus. It's going places. I was in Sainsbury's the other day, and there are like 30 different varieties. Also, you can cut up carrots, and you can dip them. Have you ever done that? Solomon! He said, I have to go to bed now. Till tomorrow, have sweet dreams. I didn't know what to say. I said, bonsoir, my golden nugget, bonsoir. Guys, you have to understand, this has been going for like weeks, albeit hitherto the greatest weeks of my life, but I had to knock it on the head. It was getting a bit out of hand. Friends were saying to me, James, do you want to come out for a drink? I was like, I can't, mate, I'm expecting an email about some gold, you know. So I figured I had to knock it on the head. I had to take it to a ridiculous conclusion. So I thought I concocted a plan. I said, look, Solomon, I'm concerned about security. When we email each other, we need to use a code. And he agreed. And I said, Solomon, I spent all night coming up with this code. We need to use it in all further correspondence. Lawyer. Gummy bear. Bank, cream egg. Legal, fizzy cola bottle, claim peanut M&Ms, documents, jelly beans, Western Union. Guys, a giant gummy lizard. I knew these were all words they used, right? I said, please call me Kit Kat in all further correspondence. I didn't hear back. I thought, I've gone too far. I've gone too far. So I had to backpedal a little bit. I said, look, Solomon, is the deal still on? Kit Kat. Because you have to be consistent. Then I did get an email back from him. He said, the business is on, I'm trying, blah, 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 blah. I said, dude, you have to use the code. What followed is the greatest email I've ever received. I'm not joking. This is what turned up in my inbox. This was a good day. The business is on. And I'm trying to raise the balance for the gummy bear. So he can submit all the needed fizzy cola bottle jelly beans to the cream egg for the peanut M&Ms process to start. Send £1,500 via a giant gummy lizard. And that was so much fun, right? That it got me thinking, like, what would happen if I just spent as much time as I could replying to as many scam emails as I could? And that's what I've been doing for 3 years on your behalf. Yeah. Let me tell you, crazy stuff happens when you start replying to scam emails. It's really difficult, and I highly recommend we do. I don't think what I'm doing is mean, right? You know, there are a lot of people out there who do mean things to scammers. I don't think what I'm doing, all I'm doing is wasting their time, Right? And I think any time they're spending with me is time they're not spending scamming vulnerable adults out of their savings, right? If you're going to do this, and I highly recommend you do, get yourself a pseudonymous email address. Don't use your own email address, because that's exactly what I was doing at the start, and it was a nightmare. Because, you know, I'd wake up in the morning and have like 1,000 emails about penis enlargements, you know, only one of which was a legitimate response to a medical question. But I tell you what, though, guys, I tell you what, any day is a good day. Any day is a good day if you receive an email that begins like this. I am Winnie Mandela, the second wife of Nelson Mandela, the former South African president. I was like, oh, that Winnie Mandela. I know so many. I need to transfer $45 million out of the country because of my husband Nelson's health condition. Let that sink in. She sent me this, which is hysterical. And this looks fairly legitimate. This is a letter of authorization, but to be honest, if there's nothing written on it, it's just a shape. I said, Winnie, I'm really sorry to hear of this. Given that Nelson died 3 months ago, I describe his health condition as... That's the worst health condition you can have, not being alive. She said, kindly comply with my banker's instructions. One love. I said, of course, no woman, no cry. She said, my banker will need transfer of $3,000. One love. I said, no problemo. I shot the sheriff. Thank you. It's funny the things you forget. I went to see my mother the other day, and she told me this story that I'd completely forgotten about, how when we were driving together, she would pull the car over, and by the time she had got out the car and gone round the car to let me out the car, I would have already got out the car and pretended to have died. Because that's how you die. And I remembered that was a game I used to play with myself to entertain myself whenever I was bored or frustrated. Settle down. People say we live in an age of information overload, right? I don't know about that, but I just know that I get too many marketing emails. I got a marketing email from a supermarket firm, which will remain nameless for predominantly legal reasons, but which I'm going to call SafeMart. I got an email from them, and it went like this. It said, just 3 weeks until SafeMart at King's Cross opens. And I resented this, because not only do I not remember signing up to that, but I resent the fact that they appear to think that I should be excited about a shop opening. So what I did is I scrolled down to the bottom of the email, and I pressed unsubscribe. And I thought that'd be the end of it. But a week later, I got another one that said, just 2 weeks until SafeMart at King's Cross opens. And I thought, well, obviously I haven't clicked hard enough, right? So I tried it again, right? Lo and behold, a week passes, you guessed it, just 1 week until SafeMart at King's Cross opens. And here's the problem. The internet gave us access to everything, but it also gave everything access to us. You know, I think, right, it's hard enough to discriminate between the things that genuinely matter in this world and, you know, the minutiae of life without having emails about supermarket chains and Candy Crush Saga. And I was really annoyed with them, and I thought, okay, I was about to write a strongly worded email, which I can do quite well. And I thought, no, I'm going to find the game. So I replied to it, and I said, I literally cannot wait. What do you need from me? They go back to me, this guy called Dan said, hi James, I've asked a colleague to help me with your query. Like it needs help. I said, what's the plan, Dan? I'm thinking fireworks, bouncy castle. I'm not sure what you mean. I said, I'm just tremendously excited about the opening. Do you want to put the bouncy castle, or shall I? He said, I think you have misunderstood. A new store is opening, but there is no celebration plan. I said, but what was all the 3 weeks until 2 weeks until emails? I was getting excited. I'm sorry you're disappointed. I said, not to worry. Let's do something anyway. Besides, the deposit on the bouncy castle was non-refundable. If we don't use it, we're out a few £100, Dan. He said, Mr. Feature, I'm not responsible for anything you have ordered. I said, let's not get into who did what. Bottom line, you and I are in this together. Question, would you be there to make sure people take their shoes off? And I'll be honest, then my relationship with Dan deteriorated somewhat because the next email I got was this. Thanks for your email, your case number is... Oh, it's outrageous. I said, Dan? And I was just like, this is... And I said, Dan! And it just kept going. And I thought, this is terrible. All I'm doing is collecting case numbers. I said, D-Dog? The store is now open. I said, but Dan, must have wondered why there was no bouncy castle. And then we were back to this. And that might have been the end of the story. But I remembered that anything, everything, even something as mundane as getting out of a car can be fun if you find the right game. So, this is what I replied. And we just, it was like we were dancing. It was just a beautiful relationship. We just kept going, and it was lovely. But to be honest, guys, it was quite labor-intensive, and you know, I had other stuff to do, believe it or not. And so what I did is I have a little email auto-replier program. And what I did is I set it up so every time it receives an email from SafeMart, it just pings one back, right? So I set it up, and it says, thanks for your email, your case number is, and then it has a little formula that I wrote.
ironically, these dates really are terrible. So I started tracking things like really stupid, awkward sexual remarks, bad vocabulary, the number of times a man forced me to high-five him. So I started to crunch some numbers, and that allowed me to make some correlations. So as it turns out, for some reason, men who drink scotch reference kinky sex immediately. Well, it turns out that these probably weren't bad guys. They were just bad for me. And as it happens, the algorithms that were setting us up, they weren't bad either. These algorithms were doing exactly what they were designed to do, which was to take our user-generated information, in my case, my resume, and match it up with other people's information. See, the real problem here is that while the algorithms work just fine, you and I don't. When confronted with blank windows where we're supposed to input our information online, very few of us have the ability to be totally and brutally honest with ourselves. The other problem is that these websites are asking us questions like, are you a dog person or a cat person? Do you like horror films or romance films? You know, I'm not looking for a pen pal, I'm looking for a husband, right? So there's a certain amount of superficiality in that data. So I said, fine, I've got a new plan. I'm going to keep using these online dating sites, but I'm going to treat them as databases. And rather than waiting for an algorithm to set me up, I think I'm going to try reverse engineering this entire system. So knowing that there was superficial data that was being used to match me up with other people, I decided instead to ask my own questions. What was every single possible thing that I could think of that I was looking for in a mate? So I started writing, and writing, and writing. And at the end, I had amassed 72 different data points. I wanted somebody who was Jew-ish, so I was looking for somebody who had the same background and, you know, thoughts on our culture, but wasn't going to force me to go to shul every, Friday and Saturday. I wanted somebody who worked hard, because work for me is extremely important, but not too hard. For me, the hobbies that I have are really just new work projects that I've launched. I also wanted somebody who not only wanted 2 children, but was going to have the same attitude toward parenting that I do. So somebody who was going to be totally okay with forcing our child to start taking piano lessons at age 3. And also maybe computer science classes, if we could wrangle it. So things like that, but I also wanted somebody who would go to far-flung exotic places like Petra, Jordan. I also wanted somebody who would weigh 20 pounds more than me at all times, regardless of what I weighed. So I now have these 72 different data points, which, to be fair, is a lot. So what I did was I went through and I prioritized that list. I broke it into a top tier and a second tier of points. And I ranked everything starting at 100 and going all the way down to 91, and listing things like I was looking for somebody who was really smart, who would challenge and stimulate me, and balancing that with a second tier and a second set of points. These things were also important to me, but not necessarily deal breakers. So once I had all this done, I then built a scoring system because, what I wanted to do was to sort of mathematically calculate whether or not I thought the guy that I found online would be a match with me. I figured there'd be a minimum of 700 points before I would agree to email somebody or respond to an email message. For 900 points, I'd agree to go out on a date, and I wouldn't even consider any kind of relationship before somebody had crossed the 1,500 point threshold. Well, as it turns out, this worked pretty well. So I go back online now. I found Jewish Doc 57. Who's incredibly good looking, incredibly well spoken. He had hiked Mount Fuji. He had walked along the Great Wall. He likes to travel as long as it doesn't involve a cruise ship, right? And I thought, I've done it. I've cracked the code. I have just found the Jewish Prince Charming of my family's dreams. There was only one problem. He didn't like me back. And I guess the one variable that I haven't considered is the competition. Who are all of the other women on these dating sites? I found Smiley Girl in 1978. She said she was a fun girl who is happy and outgoing. She listed her job as teacher. She said she is silly, nice, and friendly. She likes to make people laugh a lot. At this moment, I knew, clicking after profile after profile after profile that looked like this, that I needed to do some market research. So I created 10 fake male profiles. Now, before I lose all of you, all right, Understand that I did this strictly to gather data about everybody else in the system. I didn't carry on crazy catfish-style relationships with anybody. I really was just scraping their data. But I didn't want everybody's data. I only wanted data on the women who were going to be attracted to the type of man that I really, really wanted to marry. When I released these men into the wild, I did follow some rules. So I didn't reach out to any woman first. I just waited to see who these profiles were going to attract. And mainly what I was looking at was two different data sets. So I was looking at qualitative data. So what was the humor, the tone, the voice, the communication style that these women shared in common, and also quantitative data. So what was the average length of their profile? How much time was spent between messages? What I was trying to get at here was that I figured in person, I would be just as competitive as a Smiley Girl 1978. I wanted to figure out how to maximize my own profile online. Well, 1 month later, I had a lot of data, and I was able to do another analysis. And as it turns out, content matters a lot. So smart people tend to write a lot, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 words about themselves, which may all be very, very interesting. The challenge here, though, is that the popular men and women are sticking to 97 words on average that are written very, very well, even though it may not seem like it all the time. The other sort of hallmark of the people who do this well is that they're using non-specific language. So in my case, The English Patient is my most favorite movie ever. But it doesn't work to use that in a profile because that's a superficial data point, and somebody may disagree with me and decide they don't want to go out with me because they didn't like sitting through the 3-hour movie. Also, optimistic language matters a lot. So this is a word cloud highlighting the most popular words that were used by the most popular women, words like fun and girl and love. And what I realized was not that I had to dumb down my own profile. Remember, I'm somebody who said that I speak fluent Japanese and I know, JavaScript, and I was okay with that. The difference is that it's about being more approachable and helping people understand the best way to reach out to you. And as it turns out, timing is also really, really important. Just because you have access to somebody's mobile phone number or their instant message account and it's 2 o'clock in the morning and you happen to be awake doesn't mean that that's a good time to communicate with those people. The popular women on these online sites spent an average of 23 hours in between each communication. And that's what we would normally do in the usual process of courtship. And finally, there were the photos. All of the women who were popular showed some skin. They all looked really great, which turned out to be in sharp contrast to what I had uploaded. Once I had all of this information, I was able to create a super profile. So it was still me, but it was me optimized now for this ecosystem. And as it turns out, I did a really good job. I was the most popular person online. And as it turns out, lots and lots of men wanted to date me. So I call my mom, I call my sister, I call my grandmother. I'm telling them about this fabulous news. And they say, "This is wonderful. How soon are you going out?" And I said, "Well, actually, I'm not going to go out with anybody." Because remember, in my scoring system, they have to reach a minimum threshold of 700 points, and none of them have done that. They said, "What? You're still being too damn picky." Well, not too long after that, I found this guy, Thevenin. And he said that he was culturally Jewish. He said that his job was an Arctic baby seal hunter, which I thought was very clever. He talked in detail about travel. He made a lot of really interesting cultural references. He looked and talked exactly like what I wanted. And immediately he scored 850 points. It was enough for a date. 3 weeks later, we met up in person for what turned out to be a 14-hour-long conversation that went from coffee shop to restaurant to another coffee shop to another restaurant. And when he dropped me back off at my house that night, I rescored him. Thought, you know what? This entire time, I haven't been picky enough. Well, a year and a half after that, we were non-cruise ship traveling through Petra, Jordan, when he got down on his knee and proposed. A year after that, we were married. And about a year and a half after that, our daughter, Petra, was born. Obviously, I'm having a fabulous life. So the question is, what does all of this mean for you? Well, as it turns out, There is an algorithm for love. It's just not the ones that we're being presented with online. In fact, it's something that you write yourself. So whether you're looking for a husband or a wife, or you're trying to find your passion, or you're trying to start a business, all you have to really do is figure out your own framework and play by your own rules, and feel free to be as picky as you want. Well, on my wedding day, I had a conversation again with my grandmother, and she said, all right, maybe I was wrong. It looks like you did come up with a really, really great system. Now, your matzo balls. They should be fluffy, not hard. And I'll take her advice on that.
Two weeks ago, I was sitting at the kitchen table with my wife, Katya, and we were talking about what I was going to talk about today. We have an 11-year-old son. His name is Lincoln. He was sitting at the same table doing his math homework. And during a pause in my conversation with Katya, I looked over at Lincoln, and I was suddenly thunderstruck by a recollection of a client of mine. My client was a guy named Will. He was from North Texas. He never knew his father very well because his father left his mom while she was pregnant with him. And so he was destined to be raised by a single mom, which might have been all right, except that this particular single mom was a paranoid schizophrenic. And when Will was 5 years old, she tried to kill him with a butcher knife. I certainly think that my client shouldn't have been executed, but what I would like to do today instead is talk about the death penalty in a way I've never done before, in a way that is entirely non-controversial. I think that's possible because there is a corner of the death penalty debate, maybe the most important corner, where everybody agrees, where the most ardent death penalty supporters and the most vociferous abolitionists are on exactly the same page. That's the corner I want to explore. Before I do that, though, I want to spend a couple of minutes telling you how a death penalty case unfolds. And then I want to tell you two lessons that I have learned over the last 20 years as a death penalty lawyer from watching well more than 100 cases unfold in this way. You can think of a death penalty case as a story that has 4 chapters. The first chapter of every case is exactly the same, and it is tragic. It begins with the murder of an innocent human being, and it's followed by a trial where the murderer is convicted and sent to death row, and that death sentence is ultimately upheld by the state appellate court. The second chapter consists of a complicated legal proceeding known as a state habeas corpus appeal. The third chapter is an even more complicated legal proceeding known as a federal habeas corpus proceeding. And the fourth chapter is one where a variety of things can happen. The lawyers might file a clemency petition, they might initiate even more complex litigation, or they might not do anything at all, but that fourth chapter always ends with an execution. When I started representing death row inmates more than 20 years ago, people on death row did not have a right to a lawyer in either the second or the fourth chapter of this story. They were on their own. In fact, it wasn't until the late 1980s that they acquired a right to a lawyer during the third chapter of the story. So what all of these death row inmates had to do was rely on volunteer lawyers to handle their legal proceedings. The problem is that there were way more guys on death row than there were lawyers who had both the interest and the expertise to work on these cases. And so inevitably, lawyers drifted to cases that were already in Chapter 4. That makes sense, of course. Those are the cases that are most urgent. Those are the guys who are closest to being executed. Some of these lawyers were successful. They managed to get new trials for their clients. Others of them managed to extend the lives of their clients, sometimes by years, sometimes by months. But the one thing that didn't happen was that there was never a serious and sustained decline in the number of annual executions in Texas. In fact, as you can see from this graph, from the time that the Texas execution apparatus got efficient in the mid to late 1990s, there have only been a couple of years where the number of annual executions dipped below 20. In a typical year in Texas, we're averaging about 2 people a month. In some years in Texas, we've executed close to 40 people, and this number has never significantly declined over the last 15 years. And yet, at the same time that we continue to execute about the same number of people every year, the number of people who we're sentencing to death on an annual basis has dropped rather steeply. So we have this paradox, which is that the number of annual executions has remained high, but the number of new death sentences has gone down. Why is that? It can't be attributed to a decline in the murder rate, because the murder rate has not declined nearly so steeply as the red line on that graph has gone down. What has happened instead is that juries have started to sentence more and more people to prison for the rest of their lives without the possibility of parole, rather than sending them to the execution chamber. Why has that happened? It hasn't happened because of a dissolution of popular support for the death penalty. Death penalty opponents take great solace in the fact that death penalty support in Texas is at an all-time low. Do you know what all-time low in Texas means? It means that it's in the low 60%. Now, that's really good compared to the mid-1980s when it was in excess of 80%. But we can't explain the decline in death sentences and the affinity for life without the possibility of parole by an erosion of support for the death penalty, because people still support the death penalty. What's happened to cause this phenomenon? What's happened is that lawyers who represent death row inmates have shifted their focus to earlier and earlier chapters of the death penalty story. So 25 years ago, they focused on Chapter 4, and they went from Chapter 4 25 years ago to Chapter 3 in the late 1980s. And they went from Chapter 3 in the late 1980s to Chapter 2 in the mid-1990s. And beginning in the mid to late 1990s, they began to focus on Chapter 1 of the story. Now, you might think that this decline in death sentences and the increase in the number of life sentences is a good thing or a bad thing. I don't want to have a conversation about that today. All that I want to tell you is that the reason that this has happened is because death penalty lawyers have understood that the earlier you intervene in a case, the greater the likelihood that you're going to save your client's life. That's the first thing I've learned. Here's the second thing I learned. My client Will was not the exception to the rule. He was the rule. I sometimes say, if you tell me the name of a death row inmate, doesn't matter what state he's in, doesn't matter if I've ever met him before, I'll write his biography for you. And 8 out of 10 times, the details of that biography will be more or less accurate. And the reason for that is that 80% of the people on death row are people who came from the same sort of dysfunctional family that Will did. 80% of the people on death row are people who had exposure to the juvenile justice system. That's the second lesson that I've learned. Now we're right on the cusp of that corner where everybody's going to agree. People in this room might disagree about whether Will should have been executed, but I think everybody would agree that the best possible version of his story would be a story where no murder ever occurs. How do we do that? When our son Lincoln was working on that math problem 2 weeks ago, it was a big, gnarly problem. And he was learning how when you have a big old gnarly problem, sometimes the solution is to slice it into smaller problems. That's what we do for most problems. In math and physics, even in social policy, we slice them into smaller, more manageable problems. But every once in a while, as Dwight Eisenhower said, the way you solve a problem is to make it bigger. Okay. The way we solve this problem is to make the issue of the death penalty bigger. We have to say, all right, we have these 4 chapters of a death penalty story, But what happens before that story begins? How can we intervene in the life of a murderer before he's a murderer? What options do we have to nudge that person off of the path that is going to lead to a result that everybody, death penalty supporters and death penalty opponents, still think is a bad result, the murder of an innocent human being? You know, sometimes people say that something isn't rocket science. And by that, what they mean is rocket science is really complicated. And this problem that we're talking about now is really simple. Well, that's rocket science. That's the mathematical expression for the thrust created by a rocket. What we're talking about today is just as complicated. What we're talking about today is also rocket science. My client Will, and 80% of the people on death row, had 5 chapters in their lives that came before the 4 chapters of the death penalty story. I think of these 5 chapters as points of intervention, places in their lives when our society could have intervened in their lives and nudged them off of the path that they were on that created a consequence that we all, death penalty supporters or death penalty opponents, say was a bad result. Now, during each of these 5 chapters, when his mother was pregnant with him, in his early childhood years, when he was in elementary school, when he was middle school and then high school, and when he was in the juvenile justice system, during each of those 5 chapters, there were a wide variety of things that society could have done. In fact, if we just imagine that there are 5 different modes of intervention, the way that society could intervene, in each of those 5 chapters, and we could mix and match them any way we want, there are 3,000, more than 3,000 possible strategies that we could embrace in order to nudge kids like Will off of the path that they're on. So I'm not standing here today with the solution, but the fact that we still have a lot to learn, that doesn't mean that we don't know a lot already. We know from experience in other states that there are a wide variety of modes of intervention that we could be using in Texas and in every other state that isn't using them in order to prevent a consequence that we all agree is bad. I'll just mention a few. I won't talk today about reforming the legal system. That's probably a topic that's best reserved for a room full of lawyers and judges. Instead, let me talk about a couple of modes of intervention that we can all help accomplish, because they are modes of intervention that will come about when legislators and policymakers, when taxpayers and citizens agree that that's what we ought to be doing and that's how we ought to be spending our money. We could be providing early childhood care for economically disadvantaged and otherwise troubled kids. And we could be doing it for free. And we could be nudging kids like Will off of the path that we're on. There are other states that do that, but we don't. We could be providing special schools at both the high school level and the middle school level, but even in K through 5, that target economically and otherwise disadvantaged kids, and particularly kids who have had exposure to the juvenile justice system. There are a handful of states that do that. Texas doesn't. There's one other thing we can be doing. Well, there are a bunch of other things we can be doing. There's one other thing that we could be doing that I'm going to mention, and this is going to be the only controversial thing that I say today. We could be intervening much more aggressively into dangerously dysfunctional homes and getting kids out of them before their moms pick up butcher knives and threaten to kill them. If we're going to do that, we need a place to put them. Even if we do all of those things, some kids are going to fall through the cracks and they're going to end up in that last chapter before the murder story begins. They're going to end up in the juvenile justice system. And even if that happens, it's not yet too late. There's still time to nudge them if we think about nudging them rather than just punishing them. There are 2 professors in the Northeast, one at Yale and one at Maryland. They set up a school that is attached to a juvenile prison. And the kids are in prison, but they go to school from 8 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon. Now, it was logistically difficult. They had to recruit teachers who wanted to teach inside a prison. They had to establish strict separation between the people who work at the school and the prison authorities. And most dauntingly of all, they needed to invent a new curriculum because you know what? People don't come into and out of prison on a semester basis. But they did all those things. Now, what do all of these things have in common? What all of these things have in common is that they cost money. Some of the people in the room might be old enough to remember the guy on the old oil filter commercial. He used to say, well, you can pay me now,